What are going to be the biggest changes in our homes by 2020? Will the house of the future protect the environment? And what new technology do researchers think we'll be living with? Well, we've been talking to some of the people who've been thinking about the home of the future. Christine McNulty. I started the Home of the Future project to find out what people will want from their homes. They'll want all the benefits of modern technology, but without all this cluttered and complex gadgetry that we have today. They'll want homes that work for them. By 2020, all of this will be possible. We'll have things under control without all of these knobs and buttons. And what's more, the technology itself will be embedded in the very fabric of the house and its furnishings. So the idea is, once all the clutter of technology is gone, you'll be able to furnish your rooms in any style you like. You won't actually be able to see the technology, but it will be there, doing its job without getting in your way.
That means the lights automatically switch off and on as you walk between rooms. And the home learns how bright you like them. A simple command gives you music, perhaps piped in from a sound library. Bach, please. And no more PowerPoints. Plugs become pads, picking up power from anywhere on the wall. And even windows will take an active part in the home, according to another researcher, David Button.
This is today's glass technology, whereby combining thin transparent coatings with
screen. Well, that may be a little futuristic or too expensive for most people. But there's one area where homes are going to have to change.
There will have been enormous pressure on us to cut down on our burning of fossil fuels to protect the environment. This means that energy management in our homes will become of critical importance. There are already materials.
Oh. Hello, everyone. That was a introduction to my seminar on smart home technologies and how people from the 80s may perceive homes will look 30 years after. I wanted to thank you all for coming, and it means a lot to me that you are all here, and I hope everyone in your family and you are all fine. So today I'm gonna talk about my PhD research on smart home technologies. So I'm gonna present about benefits, opportunities, business models, also policies to accelerate the uptake of smart home technologies. And I'm gonna discuss about the benefits, about the risks and barriers these technologies entail. When I'm talking about the barriers and risks about smart home technologies, I'm not gonna only discuss those related with privacy and data, or for example, those related with energy use, but I'm also gonna talk how these technologies may facilitate practices of domestic abuse, or how these technologies may actually deter domestic abuse to happen. So basically, my research is divided in 3 different stages. The first phase consisted in expert interviews. I interviewed people, well, experts from five of institutions, so government. I interviewed people working in BASE and Ofgem academic institutions. I interviewed some colleagues from Imperial College and University of East Anglia. Private and sector firms, I interviewed people working in Amazon, for example, or Microsoft, energy suppliers such as npower and ENGIE. Civil societies, I interviewed energy system catapults that are big time working in smart transitions and smart energy services. And also I interviewed international organizations such as the EU to know how are they regulating these devices, and the International Energy Agency. All the findings that I got from the interviews then were corroborated with an extensive literature review. So basically that was the first kind of phase of the PhD research. What I asked the experts, I was very interested in answering 7 questions. However, I'm going to talk about only 6 here. So the first question was, how does one define smart home technologies? What are they? What technologies or options for smart home technologies are available in the UK and Europe. This is a question that I'm not going to talk, but I can briefly explain why I'm not talking about this. So are smart home technologies becoming the default option? In this question, the answers were very polarized. So I think they were 50% of the experts agreed that these technologies were becoming the default, and the other 50 disagree. However, I found that most people agree that in certain dimensions, such as entertainment, for example, the smartness of some devices were becoming the default. So for example, nowadays, I think it's very hard to find a TV that is not smart by default, or even smart speakers that are not, smart by default, that are not internet connected. However, if we look at energy devices, for example, thermostats, although they are start to be deploying, we're far from getting there in the energy demand, which is the main center of research of my PhD. Moving forward, I was also very interested in answering which are the biggest benefits, the biggest barriers, what business models hold the most promise, and what policy recommendations would they suggest to accelerate their uptake. The second phase of my research consisted in site visits to retail stores, and this is something that I really enjoyed. So basically, I went to stores such as PC Curry's, John Lewis, Carrefour Warehouse, and I asked staff working in these stores about how customers perceive these technologies, which were their main concerns. Also, this allowed me to see how the technologies are being displayed in the stores, which are like most likely to be available in different regions of the UK, and also which are in discount. Also, interviewing people working in these stores allowed me to corroborate certain findings in the literature, and also to corroborate certain claims that the experts did during the interviews.
Dylan, can I just interrupt you to put your slides up?
I'm sorry?
Can you put your PowerPoint slides up, if possible, on the Teams video? All we can see is the Tomorrow's World video on YouTube.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
It's okay, no problem. You're doing really well.
Sure. All right, yeah. Sorry about that. Now it works?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks so much for the
Thanks, Chili.
Thanks. All right. Sorry about that. So basically, I did site visits to retail stores, and I visited stores around the UK. In total, I visited 37 stores. Most of the stores that I visited were in London, However, I also traveled to Manchester, Bristol, and Brighton to see if, depending on the region, they have more devices available. And actually what I found is that indeed, in Brighton, for example, they had less technologies available in comparison to London and Manchester. And also when I was conducting the interviews, staff were less tech savvy, for example, in Bristol than in Manchester. So they didn't know really how some of these appliances operate. So that actually led me to the first finding, and is that there's a broad variety of smart home technologies available. In total, I counted 267 different technologies. And I organized these technologies in 13 different categories. So, for example, smart appliances, including smart washing machines, or safety and security, baby and pet monitors. And also I included, for example, clothes and accessories, which are like smart watches, and for those who cycle, smart helmets, even smart dresses, that I'm going to talk about that later. But yeah, so from these 267 technologies available, I found that 113 companies were the main distributors. And although many of these belong to the 500 Fortune companies, such as Amazon, Yamaha, Microsoft, or Google, others I really didn't know they existed. For example, those working in pet monitors, I never heard of those companies, or also home robots. I wasn't aware of some of those technologies. But I saw that many of the other companies, for example, I remember that Motorola used to work a lot in kind of communication services, mostly in mobile phones. And now they are the main suppliers of baby monitors and also are working big time in security cameras. So that changed a lot. That was the first finding. And this actually, the first finding kind of corroborates the market of smart home technologies. So according to McKinsey, the number of home connected devices sales grew by 70% from 2016 to 2017. Smart home technologies had diffused to 7.5% of households globally, and the revenues in 2018 corresponded to $44.2 billion. Around 9.9% of European households have smart systems installed. And the countries that are leading kind of the deployment of smart home technologies are France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. And the World Economic Forum estimates that smart home technologies will add $14 trillion of economic value to the global economy by 2030 and add an additional of $100 billion in operating profits across industry. But to all these, what smart home technologies are? I was very interested in answering this question because when I was doing the literature review analysis, I couldn't find an agreed definition of what these technologies are or what they entail or what can accomplish. And actually, when I was doing the interviews, none of the 31 experts that I interviewed agreed on a single definition. And in the literature, for example, the concept of what a smart home is varied dramatically from one of the first definitions that I found was in 1993, and then one of the latest is in 2019. And the concept of what smart home is changed very much. I mean, probably from the video, although some of the features that are presented in that 1989 video are present in the smart home today, the definition and the concept of what it is, it changed a lot. However, what I found based on the interviews and the literature review analysis is that these technologies revolve around 4 key elements. So they need to be digitally connected. That means that these technologies need to be connected to the internet to deliver optimal services. These technologies need to automate certain processes. So, and this is mostly related to convenience. Instead of the user doing certain things, now the technology could do it for the user instead. Another key element of smart home technologies is the remote control. So this is also related to convenience. So regardless of the location of where you are, you may still have access to your technology. So I could be here, but if I want to check what my pet is doing in Mexico, I may log into my indoor security camera and check how my dog is doing. And I think the 4 key element, which I think is one of the key features of smart home technologies, is that they have the capability of learning. So smart home technologies will learn from users' routines and behavior, and based on that, they may anticipate users' needs. And even some of these technologies may create more efficient routines or may create more efficient behaviors for the users. Based on the definition of what smart home technologies are, this led to our second finding that there are different levels of smartness. So at level 0, we have the basic analog home without any smart home technology. I think my home now is a very basic analog home. I don't have any smart home technologies installed. At level 1, we can see one smart home technology, but it wouldn't communicate with each other or to other technologies within your home. So you may have Amazon Alexa, but you may use it only to set reminders or to play music, but it wouldn't integrate to other systems. Whereas in level 2, smart home technologies become bundling and programmable together. So for example, I like to put this example when I'm talking about the level 2 of smartness. So imagine you have your smart TV and you have smart lights, and you want to create an atmosphere of being in the cinema. So you talk to your TV and you ask the TV, hey, could you please set the environment that I'm in the cinema? And then the TV will communicate with the lights, and then it will create this ambient. And actually, in some cases, the TV, what is showing, may interact with the lights, and it shows some colors probably are more vivid, and it creates this atmosphere. Or you can maybe ask Amazon Alexa to do it, and then Amazon will ask the light bulbs, and they will communicate with each other. At level 3, smart home technologies become programmable, more automated, and one of the main things is that at this level, they start to become anticipatory. So for example, BMW and Nest were working together, and every time you press the GPS button of your BMW car, it will send a signal to your Nest thermostat, and it will set the temperature according to your preferences. So at this stage, you don't even need to program anything. The technologies will start to communicate with each other, and they will anticipate certain needs. At level 4, the home becomes more intuitive, and one of the key differences at this level 4 is that smart homes will not only retrieve information from the user's routine and other technologies within the house, but also from the outside environment. So for example, if a storm is coming, you may be able to, the smart home may advise user what not to do, or may take some preventions to avoid like electricity blackouts, for example. At level 5th, the home becomes almost sentient. All systems are integrated together, and basically at this level, whenever all the systems are integrated, it may anticipate all users' needs. As we can see in the video, for example, that you were walking and then the lights might turn on as you walk by. Even some experts discuss a level 6 of automation, and basically at this stage, it goes beyond the household. So imagine a household completely sentient, but in a community or even in a city. And basically, the concept of a smart city is that it may anticipate users, or well, not users, citizens' needs. I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, though. But yeah, it would be the level 6 of automation and smartness. To all these, how smart technologies are perceived in the UK and the EU. Basically, in the United Kingdom and the EU, smart homes addresses climate change commitments, and mostly in the UK, the need to enhance the energy system to create a more efficient and more modern energy system. Actually, some of the investments from the UK, the UK is planning to invest £1 billion in the industrial strategy, and the Clean Growth Plan is over £400 million to invest in heating and energy efficiency measures. As you may be aware, there's like the smart meter implementation program, which is one of the programs where most money was invested. So far, there are like £11 billion invested in this project, and some may consider that it's a fiasco, but it's part of these kind of smart energy transitions. So the smart initiatives in the EU and the UK basically seem to be grouping in 2 categories. So the first one is the smart meters and smart grids. And basically, through this approach, what they are trying to do is that the integration of renewable sources into the grid, or to allow business models to exist, such as demand response. And the second category, smart cities and smart communities, is basically to satisfy the citizens' needs. And the EU is placing special emphasis, for example, in the elderly population in terms of medication and transport. Mostly in terms of healthcare, they're investing a lot in the elderly. This leads to our third finding, and as you may see, there are plenty of benefits. However, due to lack of time, I'm going to talk about the first 3 only. However, take a look at the rest, and at the end of the seminar, if you have further doubts, maybe I can answer your questions. What I did here is basically on the left side are the benefits, and I think on the right side there's a quote that helps illustrating the benefit. We were probably a bit biased when we were doing the interviews, because most of the people that I interviewed belong to the energy kind of field. So it may not be surprising that energy services came first. The benefits related to energy are not only, as I was telling you, most of the investments are to improve the energy system, to better manage the distribution grid and to better integrate renewables into the grid. However, if we're looking at the kind of the energy user at the individual level, what smart home technologies may allow is to better monitor energy practices and actually to provide information about how users may reduce their energy consumption at the household level. And also when we were interviewing, for example, people working at base, they mentioned that many people leave their heating on during the day and throughout the night, just because they want to get home and find a warm home. And with smart home technologies, you may be able to set your thermostat, and then it could communicate with other technologies within the household, and that would create a more efficient, and it may lead to reduced energy consumptions. Also, when I remember, I found this very funny, when we were interviewing the company that is in charge of the marketing campaigns of the rollout of smart meters, they mentioned that many people leave their heating on to keep their pets warm during winter, and actually the veterinarian association says that that's not really necessary and it's a complete waste of energy. So basically, some of the smart home technologies may enable users to avoid unsustainable practices regarding energy consumption. The second biggest benefit is related to convenience and controllability, and basically to one of the two key elements that I mentioned that are necessary to consider like smart home technologies to be smart, and basically is the automation and controllability. And I like to put this analogy when I'm talking about convenience and controllability. So imagine your smart home, it's kind of a bottler. So it will not only kind of help you managing your energy demand and integrating renewable sources into the grid, but also it may learn your behavior, your practices, and based on that, it may anticipate your needs and may create more efficient routines for you or for the user or for the household itself. And finally, financial benefits and economic savings. Basically, we can link this one to energy services, because in case, imagine that some energy users are saving a lot of money by improving their energy practices, that may lead automatically to economic savings. Actually, some of the things that some of the experts mention is that with the integration of smart technologies into the energy system, the user is becoming kind of a more interactive player. Now there is more interaction between the market and the user, whereas before it was like very one-sided. Now the user have more tools to decide which energy company to use. It could incorporate certain practices such as demand response, and that may actually lead to create economic savings. I think the quote that I wrote there, I think it kind of illustrates very well how smart home technologies may lead to financial benefits. Our fourth finding is the very vast list of emerging risks. As you may see, we found that there were more risks than benefits. And again, I'm going to talk about only the first three, but please take a look at the rest of the emerging risks. And if you have any doubts at the end of the seminar, I'll try to get back to you. So it may be not very surprising that privacy, security, and hacking came first. I mean, if you type in Google smart home technologies, most of the results might be related with how data is being misused or how vulnerable these technologies are. And that's true. I mean, in order to maximize their efficiency and to move to greater levels of smartness, smart home technologies need to collect a lot of information from the devices you have in your home, your behavior, your routines, certain demographics such as your age, how often do you exercise, for example. And imagine that these companies are holding all this information, and if this data is being hacked, misused, or stolen, it puts the customer in a very vulnerable position. So that's kind of the main risk around smart home technologies. Actually, many experts suggested that the only real risk in the smart transitions dimension are users and how vulnerable they are due to data mispractices. The second biggest risk is related to technical reliability, guarantees, and obsolescence. So many of you may have experienced some issues when you're updating your mobile phone and then it stops working because of the update made obsolete your device. So, or even with the entrance from your phones, and then you bought like your speaker and then it didn't work anymore because the entrance was different. So imagine that happening in your home. How vulnerable you'll be if then because an update, then your software stopped working. Or even worse, I mean, every now and then we need to update our software or reboot our system. So imagine that happening at the household level. And so that's another emerging risk. The other one is related with technical reliability. So the smarter homes become, the more complex and interconnected they are. So I like to say that the smarter the homes are, the less resilient they are. Because imagine there is an electricity blackout or Virgin Media, it's fixing the internet. You may be able to be lock in or lock out within your home. When we were doing other interviews and conducting focus groups, many people said that they were unable to control their thermostat when the internet connection was low, and they basically panicked. So that's kind of the second emerging risk. And the third risk is related with usability, user acceptance, and learning. And this is one of the findings that I could corroborate with the site visits to retail stores. So this is related to the fact that users do not perceive these technologies are being easy to use or nor easy to set up. Actually, many of the users are kind of afraid of these dystopian futures where robots take over. And some of the people that I interviewed during the site visits actually said that people are afraid of using these technologies. They perceive these technologies are not being easy to use. And I really like this quote from one of the participants, that the learning curve is not only from the users, but also system operators and manufacturers need to learn how these technologies operate in the real world. We found 8 policy recommendations to accelerate the uptake of smart home technologies. However, many experts also suggested that we shouldn't be accelerating the uptake of smart home technologies or the deployment of these technologies. And again, it may not be surprising that the first policy recommendation is related to protect consumers. If you didn't take enough time to look at the rest, please do. So consumer protection, privacy, data, and security. I would like to make a quick stop here because it's one of the most important topics around smart home technologies. And basically what experts suggested, and it's kind of what some NGOs are doing, such as Privacy International, are trying to create this value of data ownership. So users should know how their data is being used, for which practices. For example, if their data is being used for profiling or for marketing purposes, or if their data is being sold to third parties. So that's kind of data ownership may allow users to know how their data is being used. And that's kind of the key elements behind, like, to enhance consumer protection in the smart kind of transitions. And also kind of the other policy recommendation that experts suggested was related to the fact that, and this is something that I'm going to talk in the business models, but many of these companies are generating billions and billions of dollars in revenues from users' data, and the trade-off is not very fair. So users are giving away very personal and very intimate data, and in exchange, they may receive only one service, but the companies are generating billions. And so many experts suggested that this trade-off should be better, mostly because regardless of some users are paying subscription models or premium subscriptions, their data is still being used in the same way, and the companies are still generating tons of money with that data. The second policy recommendation is restrictions or configurations to ensure low energy or low carbon transitions. Literature and experts suggested in many instances that these technologies may lead to rebound effects, mostly in terms of convenience and controllability. So users, as I was telling, it may avoid some unsustainable practices, but also people may be like, I want to get home and I want my home to be warm, so I'm gonna set up my thermostat 2 hours before getting home, and that may lead to some rebound effects. Also, as you may know, some of the technologies within the house may be more efficient, but all the data that is being collected outside the house, probably somewhere in a server in Warwick, may lead to increased energy demand worldwide. So we need further regulation to restrictions to ensure that these technologies may lead to a sustainable future. And finally, it might be a bit linked to the second policy recommendation. We need stronger regulation for energy services or the Internet of Things. As you may know, when devices are in standby mode, they still consuming energy. And in order to deliver more optimal services, these technologies need to be internet connected. So nowadays, there are not many smart light bulbs, for example, connected, but in a future where most of the light bulbs will be internet connected, by the mere fact that these technologies are being connected, that means that they are draining energy. And that may actually lead to offset the energy savings these technologies are creating. Also, further regulation on standby energy mode. For example, I think it was PlayStation 2 that in standby mode, it consumed the same energy as a fridge. It was something crazy. And also, I think that there were been some complaints about Roomba, the automated vacuum cleaner that is not properly regulated in terms of standby energy consumption. So stronger regulation in those areas to ensure that we're moving forward low carbon transition are key. The most promising business models. Again, I'm going to talk about the first three only, but take a look at the rest, and please, if we don't have time for me to answer all the questions, send me an email and I will try to get back to you. So energy services provision, I totally agree that this business model may hold a lot of future, because in this business model, the roles change. So now the incentive is on the energy supplier to make your home efficient instead of being on the homeowner or the home renter. So in this business model, users know exactly how much are paying and how much they are getting. However, there are companies like British Gas that are providing kind of energy services provision where users pay an annual quota and they use as much energy as they want, and that may actually lead to unsustainable practices. But the fact that the energy users, and this links back to a more interactive market, know exactly how much they are paying and in turn how much are getting, I think that business model holds a lot of promise. I think it may lead to a good future. Maybe not surprising that household data and surveillance capitalism came first. As I was telling you, at the heart of the digital society is the data. So many companies are generating, as I told you, revenues from data collection. And this data collection might be in very private and intimate settings. So I remember last year I was telling you about the smart toilets, that basically it can measure how, like, the toxins you're intaking, and then probably that information may be sold to insurance companies. But also we have, for example, smart watches like Fitbit that is working nowadays with Vitality Insurance Company. And they are retrieving very personal information, and that information is being sold to a third party. Probably it's now in the, GDPR are trying to kind of address that issue, but it's not completely regulated. Maybe I can talk about that later, of some of the gaps in the GDPRs. And finally, we have bundling and integration of services. And basically, I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning, I said that 113 companies were in charge of distributing or manufacturing most of the smart home technologies. However, the trend now is that we have very few companies controlling homes ecosystems. So for example, we have Google that is deploying Google Home. Now they are deploying also security cameras, smart TVs, smart light bulbs. They are actually developing self-driving cars, which sits very nicely in the smart home. And we have Amazon, for example, which also they recently bought Ring camera and Ring doorbell. They also have Amazon Alexa, smart plugs. So what we can see is that these very big companies that were already kind of in the data business and in the smart kind of business are taking control of the house. And regardless of the GDPRS suggesting that users not be allowed to be locked in certain ecosystems, that is what is happening, because in most of the cases, your Amazon ecosystem may not play well with Google. So that kind of, it's kind of a drawback, but it's another very promising business model, because the one that accaparates the most within a home, then it will earn the most as well. I don't think I have enough time to go through this diagram, but at the end, I mean, if you have doubts, I can go back to it. So moving forward to the third stage of my PhD, smart home technologies, are they means to facilitate abuse? A still unattended area is increasing number of threats resulting from technology-related abuse, also known as cyber abuse. This term is used to capture the different ways that users of the internet can exacerbate, magnify, or broadcast abuse. This can vary from online harassment to the desire to inflict physical harm, including sexual assaults, murders, and suicides. And what we found is that with the emergence of IoT devices, such as smart locks, cameras, and smart speakers, perpetrators of domestic violence may have new means to control, stalk, and manipulate their victims. So our research explores the extent that digital technologies can act as potential enablers of domestic abuse and/or violence, but also as possible deterrents. In this part of the research, we place a special emphasis in women for two reasons. The first one I'm going to talk about now, and the second I'm going to talk about that later. But mainly in the cyber abuse and cyber domestic violence is that more than 70% of women globally, according to the UN, have already been victims or have been exposed to online violence. So what we did, our sources of primary data for the study were twofold: a nationally representative survey with qualitative and quantitative questions distributed around the UK. We took into consideration very different demographics. We balanced 50-50 males and women, different ages, different income, different parts of the UK. And we also conducted 3 focus groups in London, Surrey, and Manchester. Again, we took into consideration very different demographics, tried to balance males and women and female. And however, we didn't conduct the focus groups. We paid YouGov to do it for us. And basically, I attended all the focus groups, and they gave us the transcripts and recorded all the information, but they basically organized the focus groups. One of the key elements, going back to the cyber abuse and cyber violence, is knowledge. Knowledge is the key enabler that will facilitate cyber abuse. So victims feel they are less tech savvy than their abusers. And our findings from rolling out the survey and also from the focus groups is that women are less tech savvy than males. And that mere fact puts women in a more vulnerable position to be victims of cyber abuse. Due to victims' lack of knowledge, abusers can typically access victims' digital accounts and devices and use them to control them. What we found is that in many cases, the one that is more tech savvy in a relationship or within a household is the one in charge of setting up the device or logging into the account. So even if they are not separated, but that enhances practices of control. So he could log in into his home, check the security camera, and ask the partner, where are you, why are you not home? And that kind of enhances certain practices of stalking, manipulation, and control. However, lack of knowledge is not only on the victim sides. What we found is that regulation is far behind in this area. For example, until 1 year ago, I think, they are developing new legal frameworks to address sextortion or revenge porn. And what is happening is that, given that there is not enough knowledge from the industry and authorities, most of these issues remain unaddressed and undetected because they don't know how to tackle this problem. So that kind of turns into a bigger problem. So we also ask, the main purpose of smart home technology is to monitor family members. Digital technologies can provide the sense of being ever present in the victim's life. And what we found, and this is basically from a literature review that I did, is that in many cases, the perpetrators of domestic abuse, and that's why it's called probably domestic abuse, are not strangers, but also in the cyber abuse kind of arena, are not strangers, but usually are partners, family members, or even ex-partners. And this is because they know which technologies they have there, and they know their passwords, and probably they are less tech savvy. So again, that put victims in a more vulnerable position. And how these practices may take place, how can they monitor family members? Perpetrators could slip small tracking devices into their victims' clothes or use smart security locks to either lock out or lock in their victims. Abusers could use location-based services, parental tracking, or other safety services to track their victims. Until recently, for example, and this goes back to the learning kind of curve. Recently, I read that one guy was stalking her partner, in his car. So basically, he hacked the GPS of his Land Rover, so he knew exactly where her partner was going. So she was actually feeling stalked all the time. She didn't know where the stalking was coming from, and it was because the guy hacked the GPS. And this is another thing that I would like to put some emphasis. So nowadays we can see a trend that everyone wants to turn their devices smart. And what is happening is that they do not build like protocols solid enough in terms of security. So for example, baby monitors are super hackable, as well as cars. And there are not many news, but I remember Karen shared me one of the news that one Ring camera was, one baby monitor was hacked, and the hacker was telling the little girl what to do and what not to do. So I think this part of knowledge also remains on the manufacturers to improve the security protocols to avoid these practices to happen. So I think one of this question is where we found the most forum. Are smart home technologies intrusive? Most of the people in the focus groups and the survey agreed that these technologies are highly intrusive. And in some, kind of this intrusiveness could be summarized in the fact that regardless of where you are, you can still have control over your victim. So probably before, and this is something that we were discussing, before, the practice of stalking might be harder because you needed to follow the victim with your car, or probably be outside their office or their workplace. But nowadays, imagine if you hack the victim GPS, for example, or you put a tracking device in their clothes, you know exactly where they are, what they're doing. If they can log into your account, for example, of your smartwatch, they know at what time are you falling to bed. So there's one paper that kind of inspired me to pursue this area of research, that it's called Stalking Paradise: How Smart Technologies May Facilitate Stalking Practices. And I think that's totally true. Some of these technologies may facilitate stalking practices big time. And finally, I don't think if I have enough time, but I mean, yeah, I can do it very briefly. Gender biases in the digital arena, in the digital economy. Basically, much of the criticism around the digital economy and this digital society is that the ideal consumer is mostly male, and kind of the design and the building of these technologies is produced by men for men. For example, digital security technologies disadvantage women in terms of facial recognition, so they have trouble identifying women's faces, and this actually gets worse when there are faces of people of color. Also, with a multi-billion kind of industry, which is voice recognition softwares, they fail again to recognize women's voices because most of the data sets are built by men, so they fail to recognize women's voices. In the apps world, biases against women persist. I would like to talk, for example, about menstrual surveillance due to the fact that I was talking about very intimate and very private settings. And actually, given that this kind of menstrual surveillance is generating billions of dollars in revenues, academics and journalists have coined the term of digitalized vagina because what they see is that they can sell this information to insurance company or to their employees in very, very intimate private settings. So for example, Obia Health can track intimate information about fertility, menstrual cycle, and the progression of pregnancy. And another very kind of dystopian app is Afshner, which is available in the Saudi version of Google Home and Apple Store. And basically, this app allows men to update or withdraw permission for female relatives to travel abroad and to receive notifications via SMS if they are using their passports. So basically, that enhanced control big time over women. And actually, organizations are claiming that the use of this app is a big violation against women's and humans' rights. And I think I can talk about, no, I don't think I have enough time. But basically, moving on to conclusion, sorry, I'm going 5 minutes late. I think all in all, I think we need a more sophisticated understanding of how these technologies operate in the real world, given that some users may use it in very dystopian ways, not only users, but also manufacturers and companies. I think that further research ought to focus in developing regulatory frameworks to ensure that these technologies are leading to a sustainable future, to improve the energy systems, and to provide consumers protection. Smart homes represent a bundle of different applications and degrees of smartness, all of which cascade into different business dimensions. And smart home technologies do not exist in vacuum. Our results show that knowledge, preferences, and perception remain mediated by gender, as well as opportunities for abuse and for violence. And I think that that's it.
Fantastic. Dylan, do you have time for questions from anyone other than me?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I'm basically free all day, but not free, but yeah, I do have time, unless that you want to ask me anything else, I can probably answer by email.
Hello, Ola. Very good, fantastic. I don't know if anybody wants to ask anything. I don't know how you do hands up or anything on this. So
yeah, me neither.
I guess you just wait to see if you hear a voice.
Yeah.
Hi, can I ask a question? Thanks, Dylan, for the seminar.
Who is it?
Just Krista.
Hey, Chris.
Thanks, it was really interesting. I wanted to ask, in your interviews, did you find any evidence of inequalities potentially going up because of the smart technologies? I'm thinking like people who can't afford to buy the newest technologies might be left out somehow, or people who are maybe a bit older or less educated not being able to work them. Is there like a risk there as well?
Yeah, actually, that's one of I think it's the fourth risk that we found is related with inequality and erosion of democracy. So basically, this is how some people that may not be able to afford this technology or are not tech savvy enough to use it may be left behind. So in terms of, for example, energy transition, it wouldn't be just just transition because so many people are going to be left behind. I mean, in terms of moving to, like, there are rural communities in certain countries, they don't have access to internet. Actually, it was around 50%, no, 40% of the population, they do not have access to internet. So we need to kind of consider that when we're talking about smart transitions. But yeah, the inequality aspect is kind of key also here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Chris. Anyone else would like to ask me something else?
Hi, Dylan.
Yeah. Hey, Vaso.
Hi, this is Vasiliki.
Yes.
How are you?
So good to hear from you.
So I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
I think that in one of the slides where you mentioned the benefits that you found, but you didn't have time to expand, you talked about educational benefits. So this is one, if you can comment on that.
Yes, of course. And this is something very interesting because, I mean, the educational benefits, for example, some of these technologies that children are learning how to code is not only on the children's side. For example, adults can learn from this as well. And also, I think some of these technologies need to be entertaining and allow certain practices to be educational. For example, we have TED Talks, that it's kind of a new mean of learning. And we have all these digital platforms that allow users to learn. But you need to make these kind of platforms and apps entertaining. Otherwise, you're not going to be engaged as much. So that's kind of the educational benefit, that are not only entertaining, or they may only provide with comfort and comfortability, or to better manage your energy grid or your energy consumption, but may also allow users to learn.
It's Karen again. Can I add to that? One of Dylan's findings that was really interesting was that some of the mums in particular lamented the fact that kids would ask Alexa instead of asking the mom or asking the father, and the moms found that the fact the kids were not going to them and didn't need the parent anymore was a negative thing. The fact the kid relied on this abstract Alexa person for answering questions, and so there were no opportunities for discussion with the mom about issues, and they missed that contact. They found that an alienating aspect of smart tech.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me that. That was very interesting. Yeah.
So the kids getting the education, but they're cutting out the middleman, and the moms and dads didn't like that.
Yeah. And the second question, Vaso?
So yeah, I think maybe regarding to my first question, I think maybe there is some potential, using this kind of technologies now that we cannot have, access to schools because of lockdowns, and we're using online learning in a way. But I understand that this comes with a lot of difficulties at the same time. My second question is, you mentioned all this risk of abuse. And I recently read about apps that allow, for example, victims of domestic violence to communicate with some AI-optimized algorithms, so that they can receive some advice on what steps to take. Do you know of this kind of technologies, and maybe you can explore further?
Yes, sorry about that. I actually didn't talk about how these technologies may deter domestic abuse, because I was running out of time. I actually kind of exceeded by 10 minutes. But yes, even Tinder or Bumble or all these apps, they have services online where you can ask for advice when you are a victim, for example, of cyber dating and cyber abuse. Also, there are different kind of applications. Even I wanted to talk about, for example, the smart dress, that basically it tracks the impact, not the impact, but how people are touching each other. And if the pressure is too much, then it would send a signal that it's been hit, and that kind of prevents domestic violence, for example. There are other apps, for example, I mean, this is not exactly like one of the benefits, but if you're in trouble being victim of domestic abuse, you may actually call Alexa and say, like, call the police, and that might help actually. And there are different applications. I can send you a list of the apps that prevent domestic violence to happen, and some very useful links as well.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
Hi, Dylan.
Yes.
Hello. I wanted to ask about. Oh, hello. Good to see you. I wanted to ask about focus groups as a method for this sort of research, in terms of, can you control for, or do you then need to account for risk amplification within the focus group? So, because if a focus group is discussing something like this, someone brings up a case study of the baby monitor takeover, and that suddenly becomes the dominant kind of conversation, simply because the risk perception there is really altered. Is that something that you can manage in a focus group? Or basically, I guess I'm asking, do focus groups tend to be more risk averse than if you were doing this through interview, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't conduct the focus groups. We paid YouGov basically to do it for us. And they were very good at kind of managing the dynamics within the focus group. But that happened, I mean, and that aspect also allowed us to provide us with very richful conversations. So for example, in terms of baby monitors, we found like a lot of tension when people were like, no, they may hack you and know exactly what your baby is doing. So I mean, that's kind of a drawback, but YouGov did a very good job in those terms.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else?
Yes, hi Dylan, it's Morgan. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
I have a question regarding. Yeah, I did. I have a question regarding home economics in terms of energy management. So when one buys a sort of a home energy saver, what's the return on investment, and how does it relate to obsolescence? That makes sense.
That's a good question. It really depends. So, for example, I know that Nest thermostat, they do have an algorithm that should lead to sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. I know that thermostat, they do have an algorithm that leads to reduce energy consumption. And in some tests, for example, that Behavioral Insights team did with Nest, the savings were around 5 to 7%. So imagine that. I think the Nest thermostat, it costs around £150. So probably in a year, maybe you may be able to save enough to buy it. If you save around 10% with your smart thermostat, so maybe within a year. Because, for example, smart meters, what it's been shown is that they only accomplish energy savings from 1 to 2%, and that's nothing really in a year time. It's around £12, so that's nothing.
No, thanks.
Yeah, but I know that British Gas is working with Hive, for example. So if you pay a subscription, you get Hive for free, and then there's kind of a pay service automated. So you don't even the payment is made through the bills, so you don't need to pay for it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. It's good seeing you, Morgan.
Do we have any more questions for Dylan? I think that is a resounding no, given the silence. If you do have a question, maybe you can email Dylan directly, but I would like to say brilliant. Well done, Dylan. And you and I will have a catch up after this. And I think if you're happy, we will end this presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Dylan, for coming. All the best, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Dylan. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Dylan.
Goodbye.